Title: Gaza War, Hostage Dilemma and Netanyahu's Political Gamble. A deep dive into Israel's unfolding crisis. As the war in Gaza stretches into its most grueling phases, political tensions in Israel continue to mount. The country's leadership, especially Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, faces a critical crossroads. Continue the military offensive at the cost of humanitarian fallout and global criticism, or pursue a ceasefire and hostage release deal that may dissolve the political alliance keeping his government in power. This balance of military ambition, personal political survival, and humanitarian urgency makes the Israeli-Gaza conflict more complex than ever. At the heart of the issue lies the aftermath of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israeli territory, one of the deadliest in recent memory, resulting in over 1,000 deaths and hundreds of hostages taken into Gaza. In retaliation, Israel launched a massive military campaign to dismantle Hamas, but as the months wore on, the campaign has created a deepening humanitarian disaster, spurred growing domestic dissent, and forced Netanyahu into a defensive posture both militarily and politically. Political survival versus peace. Netanyahu has made no secret of his intention to crush Hamas once and for all. However, the Israeli Prime Minister is now cornered by two competing forces: the ideological and strategic pursuit of military victory, and the political reality of a fragile coalition. His far-right partners, such as Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, hold hardline views. They have issued warnings that any agreement involving a ceasefire or a deal with Hamas would be met with withdrawal from the governing coalition. Such a move would likely collapse the current government. At the same time, opposition leaders have floated the idea of offering temporary support to Netanyahu if he agrees to a deal that ends the war and brings home the remaining Israeli hostages. However, Netanyahu has declined. He reportedly seeks to keep his government intact until the next scheduled elections in October 2026, the maximum term possible. This suggests a calculation. Military escalation may be unpopular, but government collapse would mean political oblivion. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza. While Israeli political leaders debate strategy, the humanitarian cost in Gaza continues to escalate. The UN and numerous human rights groups have reported severe food shortages, skyrocketing malnutrition among children, and catastrophic levels of displacement. Aid agencies have said northern Gaza in particular is on the brink of famine. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been forced to flee multiple times as Israel continues its operations across Gaza, including in areas previously designated as safe zones. International outcry has grown louder with every report of bombings near hospitals, schools, and refugee camps. For many observers, the military goals of eliminating Hamas appear increasingly disproportionate to the toll on civilians. Letter from Israeli security chiefs. In a dramatic move, over 350 former Israeli security and intelligence officials, including former heads of the Mossad and Shin Bet, signed a letter addressed to US President Joe Biden, urging him to intervene and pressure the Israeli government to agree to a hostage release deal and end the war. These figures, once pillars of Israel's national security establishment, now warn that the current trajectory of the war is not only morally troubling but also strategically damaging. Yet Netanyahu's office responded dismissively, labeling the signatories as politically biased and out of touch with the current threat landscape. Talks deadlocked, trust eroding. Efforts at negotiating a ceasefire or prisoner exchange have been ongoing, but are consistently derailed. Mediators from the US, Egypt, and Qatar have tried to broker phased agreements, but the gaps between the two sides remain wide. Hamas demands a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops, while Israel insists on the unconditional return of all hostages and a future without Hamas in control of Gaza. For families of the hostages, the stalemate is agonizing. Weekly protests and vigils are held in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, demanding government action. Many accuse Netanyahu of prioritizing political optics over the lives of Israeli captives. International pressure mounts. President Biden has walked a diplomatic tightrope throughout the conflict. While reaffirming Israel's right to self-defense, the U.S. administration has increasingly voiced concern over the scale of military action and the civilian toll. Washington has also pushed Netanyahu to accept a framework for a temporary ceasefire that would allow hostages to be released and aid to enter Gaza. Other world leaders have gone further. European countries, including France, Spain, and Ireland, have publicly criticized Israel's tactics and urged an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. In contrast, countries like the UK have been more cautious, but have still expressed alarm over the growing civilian casualties. Netanyahu's calculus: legacy or liability. Netanyahu's legacy has long been defined by his promise of security for Israel. Yet this war could define him in starkly different terms. Once seen as a master political tactician, he now appears increasingly isolated, both internationally and domestically. Public approval ratings have plummeted, and many Israelis question whether his decisions are truly in the nation's best interest or merely designed to preserve his grip on power. Adding to his political vulnerability is the ongoing corruption trial in which he stands accused of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Critics argue that prolonging the war diverts attention from his legal troubles and keeps him insulated from political accountability. The road ahead. With each passing day, the stakes grow higher. The longer the war drags on, the harder it becomes to reach a peaceful resolution that satisfies both Israel's security needs and the humanitarian urgency in Gaza. Netanyahu continues to gamble that military success will eventually justify the cost, but that cost is mounting, politically, morally, and strategically. Opposition parties may soon unify around a no-confidence motion, especially if negotiations remain deadlocked. International allies, especially the US, could apply greater diplomatic pressure, possibly even imposing conditions on military aid. Inside Gaza, the situation grows more unstable, raising fears that even if Hamas is eliminated, the vacuum may be filled by something worse. For now, Netanyahu walks a dangerous tightrope, balancing political ambition, coalition survival, military strategy, and the will of a deeply divided nation.